Hi, I'm Olivia. They said there wasn't room for me at my husband's birthday dinner, but I saw the reservation list on the hostess stand, 20 names, and mine had been deliberately scratched out with black pen. My mother-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "Did you honestly think you were welcome?" That night, I didn't cause a scene. I simply asked the hostess to let the restaurant manager know I was here. They hesitated, but then he walked out, and my sister-in-law's new boyfriend froze mid-step. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The text message arrived just as I was putting the final touches on James's birthday gift, a vintage watch I'd spent months tracking down, the exact model his grandfather had owned. I smiled as I carefully placed it in a small velvet box, imagining his face when he opened it. We'd been married for 3 years, but his family had never quite accepted me. I was too career-focused, too outspoken, not traditional enough for their tastes. Still, this was his 35th birthday. Surely they wouldn't exclude me from that. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up, expecting James's usual heading home message. Instead, it was a photo from his cousin Mia, always the family gossip, but occasionally my reluctant ally. The image showed an elegantly set table at Bellissimo, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Crystal glasses caught the light, name cards perfectly positioned at each setting. My in-laws had spared no expense for their golden child's birthday. The caption read, "Pre-birthday setup, so excited for tonight." I squinted at the photo, zooming in to see the name cards. James, Rebecca, his mother, Howard, his father, Eliza, his sister, Daniel, Eliza's new boyfriend, Aunt Claire, Uncle Thomas, cousins Mia, Peter, and their partners, even James's childhood, friends Kyle and Rachel, everyone who mattered to him, everyone except me. I scrolled through my messages, checking if I'd somehow missed an invitation. Nothing. I called James, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me. Just wondering about your birthday dinner tonight. Call me back when you can." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The house felt suddenly too quiet, the gift box on the counter almost mocking me. 3 years of marriage, and still an afterthought. Or worse, deliberately excluded. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe James assumed I knew and forgot to mention it. Maybe. But deep down, I recognized the familiar pattern. 2 weeks ago, I'd overheard Rebecca talking to Eliza on the phone when she thought I was upstairs. "We need an evening where he can relax, just family," she'd said, voice hushed but clear. She changes the whole dynamic. James acts different when she's around. I had brushed it off then, assumed they were talking about someone else. Now, the words replayed in my mind with perfect clarity. I should have felt the hot sting of tears or the burning flare of anger. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, like the still surface of a deep lake. I walked to our bedroom and opened the closet, selecting my outfit deliberately, a tailored burgundy dress, classic but confident. Not flashy, not desperate for attention, but impossible to dismiss. I applied my makeup with precision, slipped on my gold hoop earrings, the ones James had given me on our first anniversary, and grabbed my coat. I wasn't going there to make a scene or beg for inclusion. I was going because after 3 years of tiptoeing around their disapproval, of making myself smaller to fit their idea of who James should have married, I was done. If they wanted to erase me from his life, they'd have to do it while looking me in the eye. The Uber pulled up outside Bellissimo at exactly 7:30 p.m. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them already gathered, champagne flowing, Rebecca holding court at the head of the table beside James, who was smiling at something Kyle had said. My husband looked happy, relaxed in a way he rarely was when navigating the tense waters between me and his family. For a moment, I almost turned around. Who was I to intrude on his happiness? But then, I remembered the promises we'd made. To face everything together. To be partners in all things. If he'd chosen to exclude me, that was a conversation we needed to have. But I suspected he hadn't been given much choice in the matter. The restaurant's interior was warm and inviting, soft lighting reflecting off dark wood and copper accents. A pianist played softly in the corner, the gentle melody almost drowned out by conversation and laughter. The hostess greeted me with a professional smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here for the Callaway party," I said, my voice steady. "My husband's birthday dinner." She consulted her tablet, scrolling through what I assumed was the guest list. Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on the reservation." "Could you check again?" "Olivia Callaway. I'm James's wife." The hostess looked uncomfortable now, her eyes darting briefly toward the private dining area, where my husband's family continued their celebration, oblivious to my arrival. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Callaway, but the reservation specifically notes the final head count. They've already been seated, and we're at capacity for that room." I remained calm, even as I noticed the reservation list on her podium, and there, it was, my name, written and then crossed out with decisive black strokes. Not forgotten. Removed. "I understand," I said, smiling gently. "Would you mind if I just pop in to give my husband his birthday gift? I won't stay." Before she could answer, I heard the click of heels on the marble floor behind me. "Olivia?" The voice was perfectly modulated to sound surprised rather than annoyed, though I knew better. "What are you doing here?" Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I turned to face my mother-in-law. Rebecca Callaway stood like a sentinel in her designer dress, pearl necklace, gleaming hair impeccably styled. She'd mastered the art of looking concerned while communicating disapproval. "Hello, Rebecca. I came to wish James a happy birthday." I held up the small gift box as evidence of my benign intentions. Her smile remained fixed, not reaching her. "How thoughtful. But this is a small family gathering. Did you honestly think you were welcome?" The words were delivered so smoothly they almost didn't register as the slap they were intended to be. Almost. I didn't flinch. Considering I'm his wife, yes, I rather did. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "James understands this is family tradition. Just the inner circle. You know how these restaurants are. Limited seating, exclusive reservations. We simply couldn't accommodate everyone." Behind her, I caught sight of Eliza approaching, curiosity drawing her into our little standoff. Her new boyfriend, Daniel, trailed behind, glancing between his phone and the unfolding scene, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. 20 seats seems like plenty of accommodation, I observed quietly. Including for people I've never even met. I nodded toward Daniel, who looked up at the mention, his expression shifting from disinterest to something like recognition. "James's birthday has always been a Callaway tradition," Eliza chimed in, sliding next to her mother like they were forming a wall. "Daniel is here because he's important to me, and Mother and Father wanted to meet him properly." The irony might have been funny if it wasn't so painful. 3 years of marriage wasn't enough to make me important to their family dynamic, but Eliza's boyfriend of 3 months warranted an invitation to the exclusive inner circle. "I see," I said simply, because really, what else was there to say? The message was crystalline in its clarity. I was still an outsider, tolerated but not embraced, while they closed ranks around what they considered their real family. Rebecca's smile returned, satisfied that I understood my place. "I'll make sure James gets your gift. He'll call you later, I'm sure." Dismissal complete. Problem handled. The Calloway women were nothing if not efficient in their exclusions. I could have turned and left. Part of me wanted to, the part that had spent 3 years trying to win their approval, making myself smaller and less threatening to their carefully ordered world. But something had shifted inside me. A quiet resolve hardening like amber around an insect, preserving the moment when I finally saw everything clearly. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I'd like to speak with the manager first." Rebecca's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose a fraction. "The manager? Whatever for?" "I'd just like to clarify something about the reservation." The hostess, who had been pretending not to listen to our exchange, looked up nervously. "I can call the manager if you'd like, ma'am." "That would be wonderful, thank you." I smiled at her, a genuine smile that seemed to surprise her after the tension of the previous conversation. Rebecca sighed, the sound practiced to convey maximum irritation, with minimum effort. "This is unnecessary, Olivia. You're making a scene." "No scene," I assured her. "Just a quick question." The hostess murmured something into her phone, and moments later, a tall man in a well-tailored suit emerged from the direction of the kitchens. He moved with the confident grace of someone used to handling difficult situations with diplomacy. "Good evening, ladies. I'm Marcus Delano, the general manager. How can I assist you?" His voice was warm, professional, the kind that made people feel both important and at ease. Before I could speak, Rebecca stepped forward, social charm activated like a switch had been flipped. "Marcus, so lovely to see you again. There seems to be a small misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law wasn't included in our reservation, and she's a bit upset about it. Perhaps you could find her a table elsewhere in the restaurant." Marcus turned to me, his expression neutral but kind. "I'd be happy to arrange another table, ma'am, though we are quite busy tonight." "Thank you, but that's not necessary," I said. "I was just wondering if Daniel Rowe had arrived yet." The question seemed to catch everyone off guard. Daniel, who had been hovering at the edge of our little group, suddenly looked directly at me for the first time. "Daniel?" Marcus repeated, glancing at the young man in question. "Yes, he's part of the Calloway reservation, I believe." "Perfect," I said. "Would you let him know that Olivia's here? He'll understand." The restaurant manager looked confused, but turned toward Daniel, who was already stepping forward. His expression transformed from awkward bystander to something approaching. Alarm mixed with respect. "Ms. Bennett?" he said, using my maiden name. "I didn't realize. I knew James's wife was named Olivia, but I never connected that you were the same Olivia Bennett." Rebecca and Eliza exchanged confused glances. Eliza tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "You know her?" Daniel nodded, straightening his posture almost imperceptibly. "Yes, of course. Mrs. Calloway is my boss. She's the CEO of Meridian Technologies." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the pianist's gentle notes from across the restaurant. Rebecca's perfectly composed face froze in an expression I couldn't quite identify, somewhere between shock and calculation. Eliza's mouth actually dropped open slightly before she caught herself. "Your boss?" Eliza repeated, looking between us like she was trying to solve a particularly challenging equation. Daniel nodded. "I just started in the development department 3 months ago. Ms. Bennett, Mrs. Calloway, approved my hiring personally. She's actually the reason I was able to relocate here." I smiled, not unkindly. Daniel showed exceptional promise in his interview. We're lucky to have him. I turned to the restaurant manager, whose expression had shifted to one of dawning recognition. "Marcus, I apologize for the confusion. It seems there was a misunderstanding about the reservation." Marcus was already nodding. "No apology necessary. Mrs. Calloway, we're honored to have you dining with us tonight. I'll have another place set immediately." "That's really not necessary," Rebecca interjected, her voice slightly higher than usual. "The table is already arranged perfectly. The seating plan was very specific. Marcus hesitated, looking between us, professional courtesy warring with the reality of who signed Daniel's paychecks. Daniel cleared his throat. Actually, I'd be happy to give up my seat. I was only invited as Eliza's +1 and— Nonsense, I interrupted gently. This is a family celebration. I wouldn't dream of displacing you. The manager stepped in smoothly. We can easily accommodate one more at the table, Mrs. Calloway. It would be our pleasure. Rebecca's smile had gone brittle around the edges. Well, this is unexpected. She turned to me, social mask firmly in place but strain showing through the cracks. Of course you should join us, Olivia. I had no idea you were Daniel's employer. James never mentions your work. There it was, the slight barb hidden in the concession. James never talks about you. You're not important enough to mention. Even now, she couldn't help herself. James respects the separation between our home and work lives, I said simply. Something I've always appreciated about him. Marcus gestured toward the private dining room. Shall we? As we walked toward the table where my husband sat with his back to us, still unaware of the small drama that had unfolded in the lobby, I felt a strange lightness. Not the vindication I might have expected, or even satisfaction at the shocked expressions still lingering on my in-laws' faces. Just clarity, the kind that comes when facades finally crack and you can see the true shape of things underneath. James looked up as we approached, his expression cycling rapidly from surprise to confusion to something like guilt when he saw me. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over his water glass. Liv, I didn't know you were coming. The genuine pleasure in his voice confirmed what I had suspected. He hadn't been the architect of my exclusion. Whether he had gone along with it too easily was a conversation for another time. Surprise, I said softly, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Happy birthday. The table had fallen into a strange hush, the other guests sensing the undercurrents, but not quite understanding them. Rebecca quickly took control, her social training kicking in despite her obvious displeasure. Everyone, make room, Olivia. Will be joining us after all. Her voice carried just the right note of graciousness, as if she'd planned this all along. Marcus, we'll need another place setting. As the staff hurried to rearrange the table, adding a chair beside James and bringing fresh silverware, I felt the weight of curious stares. Kyle and Rachel, James's friends since college, gave me genuine smiles. They'd always been kind, inviting us both to their events without hesitation. Aunt Claire looked confused but not unfriendly. Uncle Thomas seemed oblivious to the tension, already returning to his conversation about golf with Howard. James leaned close to me as I took my seat. I'm so glad you're here, he whispered. I wanted to call you, but Mom insisted this was just a small family thing before our real celebration this weekend. I should have pushed back harder. I'm sorry. I squeezed his hand under the table. We'll talk about it later. For now, let's enjoy your birthday. Daniel, seated across from us beside a clearly rattled Eliza, gave me a respectful nod. The power dynamics of the table had shifted in ways no one had anticipated when they'd so carefully crossed my name off that reservation list. Rebecca, ever the consummate hostess, recovered quickly. Well, now that everyone is here, let's continue our celebration. Howard was just about to propose a toast to our wonderful son. Howard stood, raising his glass of scotch. He was a man of few words at the best of times, preferring to let his wife handle the social niceties while he managed the family's financial portfolio. To James, he said simply, 35 years of making us proud. To many more. Glasses clinked around the table. I sipped my water, waiting for the waiter to bring me a wine glass. James's hand found mine again under the table, squeezing gently. So, Olivia, Aunt Claire said into the momentary lull, her curiosity evidently getting the better of her. Daniel says you're his boss. At Meridian Technologies? I had no idea you were so established there. The table's attention swiveled to me. In 3 years of reluctant family gatherings, this was perhaps the first time anyone had expressed genuine interest in my professional life. Yes, I've been with Meridian for about 8 years now, I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. I started in product development and moved up through the ranks. Moved up is an understatement, Daniel interjected, his earlier discomfort seemingly forgotten as he warmed to a subject he knew well. Mrs. Calloway transformed the entire R&D department before becoming the youngest CEO in company history last year. The innovation pipeline under her leadership has doubled our market share. James beamed beside me, his pride evident. Liv never brings her work home, but she's brilliant at what she does. The board practically begged her to take the position. Rebecca's smile remained fixed in place. How fascinating. I always thought you did something in computers. She waved her hand vaguely, as if all technology was an indistinguishable blur to her. James never goes into detail. As I mentioned, we keep work and home separate, I said. It's healthier that way. Meridian Technologies, Howard said slowly, recognition dawning. Aren't they the ones who just secured that government contract? Something about next-generation security systems? Daniel nodded enthusiastically. Yes, sir, a $300 million contract, awarded last quarter, the largest in company history. Howard's expression shifted subtly as he reassessed me. As an investment banker, he respected numbers above all else. Impressive, he conceded, the word clearly not one he used lightly. The waiter arrived with my wine and took my order, the momentary interruption giving everyone a chance to absorb this new information. When conversation resumed, the atmosphere had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Eliza kept darting glances between me and Daniel, clearly reconciling her boyfriend's obvious respect for me with her own dismissive attitude. Kyle and Rachel engaged me directly about work for the first time, their genuine interest a refreshing change. Throughout the meal, I noticed Rebecca watching me, her expression calculating. She had built her identity around being the matriarch of a successful family, the power behind the throne. Finding out that her dismissed daughter-in-law commanded more professional respect than anyone else at the table had clearly unsettled her worldview. As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate cake with Happy Birthday James written in elegant script, I handed my husband the small velvet box I brought. I hope you like it, I said softly. It took some time to find the right one. James opened it carefully, his eyes widening as he recognized what lay inside. Liv, he breathed, lifting the vintage watch with reverent hands. This is Granddad's watch. The same model, at least. How did you— I have my resources, I said with a small smile. Check the inscription. He turned the watch over, reading the words I'd had engraved on the back. His eyes grew suspiciously bright. It's perfect, he whispered, leaning in to kiss me properly. Family audience be damned. Rebecca cleared her throat. What a thoughtful gift. She glanced at the designer watch she and Howard had presented earlier. Beautiful but impersonal, lacking the emotional resonance of my choice. For perhaps the first time, she seemed to realize she might have misjudged more than just my professional standing. As the evening wound down, conversations flowed more naturally than they ever had at family gatherings. Not because anything fundamental had changed about who I was, but because their perception had shifted. The same qualities they had previously found threatening, my independence, my ambition, my quiet confidence, were suddenly reframed as assets once they understood their value in the outside world. It was both validating and slightly sad. 3 years of trying to be accepted for who I was, only to finally gain a measure of respect because of my title and salary. Not because I made their son happy, not because I was kind or intelligent or loving, because I had power they hadn't known about. As we prepared to leave, Rebecca approached me while James was saying goodbye to his friends. Her smile was different now, less condescending, more cautious. Olivia, I feel we should have a proper lunch sometime, just the two of us. There's clearly so much about you I don't know. I regarded her steadily. I'd like that, Rebecca. I've been here all along, waiting to be known. Something flickered in her eyes. Perhaps recognition, perhaps discomfort at the gentle rebuke. She nodded once, sharply. Yes, well, we'll arrange it soon. James joined us, wrapping his arm around my waist. Ready to go home? I leaned into his embrace. More than ready. As we walked out into the cool evening air, James pulled me closer. I'm sorry about tonight. About them. I should have insisted you be included from the start. I stopped on the sidewalk, turning to face him under the gentle glow of the street lamps. Why didn't you? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his tell when he was uncomfortable. I don't know. It's just easier sometimes to go along, to keep the peace. At what cost? I asked softly. Because tonight made something very clear to me, James. I've spent 3 years trying to be someone your family could accept, making myself smaller, separating my professional life from our personal one, because I thought it might threaten them somehow. I've been patient. I've been understanding. But I won't be erased. He looked stricken. I never wanted that. I thought I was protecting you from them, not them from you. I took his hand. I don't need protection. I need partnership. I need to know that when someone tries to write me out of your life, you'll be the first one to put me back in. I will, he promised, his voice fervent. God, Liv, I'm so sorry. Seeing you walk in tonight, watching you handle everything with such grace while I just sat there, I was ashamed of myself. Good, I said, but squeezed his hand to soften. The word, use that feeling. Remember it the next time your mother tries to keep the peace by excluding me. He nodded, then a small smile tugged at his lips. Though after tonight, I'm not sure she'll try that again. The look on her face when Daniel called you his boss was educational. I laughed despite myself. I didn't plan that, you know. I had no idea Daniel was Eliza's new boyfriend until I saw him there. The universe has a sense of humor, James said, pulling me close again, and excellent timing. As we walked to our car, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won some petty victory or forced my way into their exclusive circle, but because for the first time since I'd married James, I'd stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. I'd stood in my full truth and let them see me, not as the interloper they'd imagined, but as the woman I'd always been. The night air was crisp, with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, perhaps even new boundaries. But tonight had shifted something fundamental in the landscape of our marriage and family dynamics. I'd been invisible for 3 years, carefully edited out of the Calloway family portrait. Tonight, I'd finally stepped fully into the frame, refusing to be cropped out any longer. Happy birthday, I whispered to James as we drove home, his grandfather's watch gleaming on his wrist, a connection to his past that I, not his family, had restored to him. I think we both got a gift tonight. He glanced over at me, his eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. What's that? Clarity, I said simply. And a fresh start. Have you ever been deliberately excluded by people who were supposed to accept you? How did you reclaim your place at the table? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. The drive home from Bellissimo was quiet, but not in the tense way I'd grown accustomed to after Calloway family gatherings. This silence felt different, reflective. pregnant with possibility. James's fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel, his new old watch catching the glow of passing streetlights. Every few minutes he'd glance over at me, his expression a mixture of apology, admiration, and something else I couldn't quite place. "You're staring," I said finally, a small smile playing at my lips. "I'm seeing you," he replied, his voice soft but certain, maybe for the first time in a long while. We pulled into our driveway, the motion sensor lights illuminating our modest craftsman home. James had insisted on something simple when we were house hunting, despite his family's expectations that we'd choose something in their exclusive neighborhood. This place had been our compromise, close enough for family obligations, far enough for independence. Inside, I kicked off my heels and padded to the kitchen, pouring us both a glass of wine. James accepted his with a grateful nod, then set it down untouched. "Why didn't you ever tell them?" he asked. "About your position at Meridian, about everything you've accomplished." I leaned against the counter, considering the question carefully. At first, I thought they weren't interested. Then I realized it was more complicated than that. "How so?" "Your mother has spent her entire adult life being the most accomplished woman in any room. Her identity is built around being the perfect corporate wife, the flawless hostess, the woman who sacrificed her own ambitions to support her husband and raise successful children." I took a sip of wine. I represented something that threatened that narrative. James frowned. "That's not fair to you." No, it wasn't. But I understood it. So I compartmentalized, kept work at work, tried to find common ground elsewhere. I shrugged. It just never materialized. "And I let you do that," James said, the realization seeming to settle heavily on him. "I knew how they were treating you, and I just accepted it, made excuses." I studied him for a moment. This was the conversation we'd been dancing around for 3 years. "Why did you? Accept it, I mean." He ran a hand through his hair, mussing the careful styling his mother always praised. "Habit, maybe? For 32 years before I met you, keeping the peace meant giving my mother what she wanted. It was easier than the alternative." "Which was?" "Disappointing her, falling short of expectations." He gave a humorless laugh. "Ironic, considering I've been disappointing you instead." I set my glass down and moved closer to him. "I'm not disappointed in you, James. I'm disappointed in us. We've been partners in everything except this. We built this home together. We support each other's dreams. We face every other challenge as a team. But with your family, we've been divided. You on their side, me on the outside." "Not anymore," he said firmly. "Tonight changed something, Liv. Seeing you walk in there, head high, not playing their games, I was proud of you, and ashamed of myself." I took his hand, feeling the cool metal of his new watch against my fingers. It's not about shame. It's about choices. Every day we choose who we want to be, what we're willing to accept, what boundaries we need to set. He nodded slowly. "I made the wrong choices." "We both did," I admitted. "I chose silence when I should have spoken up. I diminished myself to make others comfortable. That's on me." James pulled me into an embrace, his heartbeat steady against my ear. "Tomorrow," he murmured into my hair, "we start making better choices. Together." I closed my eyes, allowing myself to hope that tonight truly had been a turning point. Not because my in-laws had suddenly discovered I was important in the outside world, but because my husband had finally seen the cost of their exclusion. Morning came with the gentle chime of my phone alarm. I reached over to silence it, careful not to wake James, but his side of the bed was empty. The scent of coffee drifted up from the kitchen, along with the quiet murmur of his voice. He was on a call. I slipped on my robe and padded downstairs, pausing in the doorway when I realized who he was talking to. No, Mom, that's not going to work for us, James was saying, his tone firm but not angry. Olivia will be there, or neither of us will. A pause. This isn't negotiable. I understand you had plans, but they need to change. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, I realize this is last minute, but I'm not asking for your permission. I'm informing you of my decision. I leaned against the doorframe, watching this new version of my husband. Spine straight, voice steady, no hint of the accommodation I'd grown used to hearing when he spoke with his mother. I love you, Mom. I want us to find a way forward that includes everyone I love, but I won't compromise on this anymore. He listened for a moment, then said with finality, We'll see you Sunday, both of us. He ended the call and turned, startling, slightly when he saw me watching. Hey, he said, a tentative smile forming. How much of that did you hear? Enough, I replied, moving to accept the coffee mug he offered. Sunday? He nodded. Dad's retirement announcement. They're hosting a garden party at the house. Traditionally immediate family only, of course. His tone turned wry on the last words. And you told her I'm coming. I told her we're coming. Together. Or not at all. He searched my face. Is that okay? I should have asked you first. I smiled, something warm unfurling in my chest. It's more than okay. It's exactly what partnership looks like. He kissed me then, morning breath and coffee and all, and I knew something fundamental had shifted between us. Not because of my revealed status or Daniel's unexpected connection, but because James had finally drawn a line in the sand, not for his benefit, but for mine. For us. I'm proud of you, I told him softly. He shook his head. Don't be. I'm just finally doing what I should have done 3 years ago. The next few days passed in a blur of work commitments and quiet, meaningful conversations with James. We talked about patterns we'd fallen into, compromises that had become concessions, how we'd both contributed to the dynamic with his family. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, like clearing out long-neglected corners of our relationship. Sunday arrived sunny and mild, perfect weather for a garden party. I dressed with care, a blue sundress, elegant but not showy, paired with comfortable wedges for navigating the expansive lawn at the Callaway estate. James wore khakis and a button-down, his grandfather's watch proudly displayed on his wrist. Ready? He asked as we pulled up to the wrought iron gates that guarded his childhood home. I took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. The Callaway. Estate sprawled across 3 manicured acres, the colonial-style mansion gleaming white against the blue sky. Staff had set up a large tent on the back lawn, white linen tablecloths fluttering in the gentle breeze. Flowers spilled from urns and hanging baskets, a riot of color carefully curated to appear effortless. Rebecca spotted us immediately as we rounded the side of the house, her social smile firmly in place. She wore a pale pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, pearls at her throat and ears. James, darling, right on time. She kissed his cheek, then turned to me with a slightly stiffer smile. Olivia, lovely to see you again. Thank you for having me, Rebecca, I said simply, no hint of irony or challenge in my tone. Today wasn't about scoring points. Of course, she replied, as if my inclusion had been her idea all along. We're just gathering on the terrace before the announcement. Howard's finishing up a call. We followed her through the French doors to the stone terrace where about 20 people mingled, champagne flutes in hand. I recognized most of them from various Callaway functions over the years. Howard's partners from the investment firm, a few family friends, the same relatives who had been at the birthday dinner. Eliza and Daniel stood near the stone balustrade, deep in conversation. When Daniel spotted me, he straightened almost imperceptibly, that same respectful posture I'd noticed at the restaurant. He murmured something to Eliza, who turned to look at us, her expression guarded. "Should we say hello?" James asked quietly. I nodded. "Absolutely." As we approached, Daniel extended his hand to James. "Happy belated birthday, James. It was great meeting you the other night." James shook his hand warmly. "Likewise, though I understand you and my wife already knew each other." Daniel smiled. "Yes, Mrs. Calloway has been an incredible mentor at Meridian. The whole development team regards her highly." I could see Eliza processing this information, recalibrating her understanding of her boyfriend's relationship with me. Not just boss and employee, but mentor and mentee. It added a dimension she hadn't considered. "Olivia," she said, making a visible effort to sound warm, "I'm glad you could join us today. Daniel's been telling me more about your work at Meridian. It sounds impressive." Coming from Eliza, this was practically effusive praise. In 3 years, she'd never shown interest in anything about me, beyond criticism of my clothing choices or entertaining style. "Thank you," I said. "Daniel's being kind. The truth is, our team is exceptional. I'm just lucky enough to work with brilliant people who make me look good." Daniel laughed. "She always does that. Deflects praise onto the team. It's one of the reasons everyone's so loyal." Eliza raised an eyebrow, studying me with new interest. "I never would have guessed you were the self-effacing type." "There's a difference between being self-effacing and being a good leader," I replied mildly. "Recognizing others' contributions isn't diminishing your own. It's acknowledging that success is rarely a solo achievement." James squeezed my hand, a small gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by his sister. Her gaze flickered between us, noting the united front we presented. "Daniel mentioned you've expanded into government contracts," she said, making an obvious effort at engagement. "That must be challenging work." And just like that, we were having our first real conversation. Not about place settings or proper attire for Calloway events, but about work and challenges and professional growth. It wasn't warm or particularly personal, but it was authentic in a way our previous interactions had never been. James excused himself to greet an elderly uncle, leaving me with Eliza and Daniel. As we talked, I noticed Rebecca watching us from across the terrace, her expression thoughtful as she observed her daughter's newfound interest in my career. Howard appeared at her side, distinguished in his navy blazer, silver hair catching the sunlight. He said something to Rebecca, who nodded and tapped a spoon against her champagne flute to gather everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming today," she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the terrace. "We've gathered to celebrate a significant milestone. After 35 years at the helm of Calloway Investments, Howard has decided it's time for a new chapter." Polite applause rippled through the gathering. Howard stepped forward, assuming the spotlight with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to boardrooms and business dinners. "When I founded Calloway Investments, I had a vision of building something that would outlast me," he began, his deep voice resonant with pride. "Today, I'm proud to announce not only my retirement but the transition of leadership to the next generation." My gaze found James automatically. We'd discussed Howard's retirement, of course, but James had always been clear that he had no interest in joining the family firm. His passion was architecture, not finance. His parents had never quite accepted this deviation from their plans, treating his career as a phase he would eventually outgrow. "James," Howard continued, confirming my suspicion, "has always been expected to step into my shoes. It's what we raised him for, prepared him for." James moved closer to me, his body tense. I slipped my hand into his, offering silent support. "However," Howard said, his tone shifting slightly, "life doesn't always follow our carefully laid plans. James has built his own path, his own success." He glanced at his son, a hint of something like newfound respect in his expression. "And I've come to appreciate that forging your own way takes courage." A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathering. This was not the announcement anyone had expected, least of all James, whose grip on my hand had tightened. Callaway Investments will continue under new leadership, Howard announced. Our longtime CFO, Michael Thornton, will assume the role of CEO, with my continued guidance as Chairman Emeritus. More applause, though I noticed several guests exchanging confused glances. The Callaways had always kept leadership strictly within the family. This was unprecedented. Additionally, Howard continued, we'll be expanding our portfolio to include a new technology investment division, focusing on emerging tech companies with significant growth potential. My interest peaked. This was my world he was stepping into. In fact, Howard said, his gaze finding me in the crowd, I've recently become aware of expertise within our own family that might prove invaluable to this new venture. Olivia, I'd be interested in your thoughts on potential investment targets in the tech sector. The silence that followed was profound. Rebecca's smile froze in place. Eliza's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. And James was looking at me with a mixture of pride and amusement, as if to say, see what you've been missing by keeping these worlds separate? I'd be happy to share some insights, Howard, I replied evenly, conscious of all eyes on me. Though I should note that my expertise is in development and operations, not investment strategy. Howard nodded, apparently pleased by my response. Different perspectives are precisely what we need. Perhaps we could schedule a lunch next week to discuss further. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. As Howard concluded his announcement and guests dispersed into smaller conversation groups, James leaned close to my ear. Did my father just ask for your professional input? Am I hallucinating? I laughed, softly. I believe he did. The world is full of surprises. Olivia. Rebecca had materialized beside us, her smile tight but determined. Could I borrow you for a moment? There's someone I'd like you to meet. James gave me a questioning look, but I nodded reassuringly. Of course, Rebecca. She led me to where an elegant older woman stood surveying the garden, champagne untouched in her hand. Margaret, this is my daughter-in-law, Olivia. Olivia. Margaret Whitmore sits on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation. I mentioned your interest in their technology initiatives. I blinked in surprise. I had indeed mentioned this, once, nearly 2 years ago, at a Christmas dinner where I'd attempted to engage Rebecca in conversation about charitable causes. She had changed the subject so quickly I'd assumed she hadn't heard me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore, I said, extending my hand. The Foundation's work in bringing advanced diagnostic tools to underserved communities is remarkable. Margaret Whitmore's handshake was firm, her assessment direct. Rebecca tells me you have some expertise in this area. Are you in healthcare technology? Before I could answer, Rebecca interjected, Olivia is the CEO of Meridian Technologies. They've been doing groundbreaking work in security systems, but I believe their infrastructure could be adapted for healthcare applications. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Not only had she accurately described my company's capabilities, but she'd made a legitimate connection to a cause I cared about, and presented me as someone worth knowing. That's exactly right, I managed, recovering quickly. We've actually been exploring partnerships in the healthcare sector, particularly around secure data transmission for remote diagnostics. Margaret's interest visibly sharpened. We should talk further. The Foundation is launching a new initiative next quarter. Your perspective could be valuable. The conversation flowed from there, stretching from polite networking into genuine discussion of possibilities. Throughout, Rebecca remained engaged, occasionally adding a comment that highlighted some aspect of my background or expertise, information she couldn't have gleaned from our brief interactions over the years. When Margaret eventually excused herself to greet another guest, I turned to Rebecca with undisguised curiosity. You've done your research. She had the grace to look slightly abashed. After the other night, I realized how little I knew about you. About your work, it seemed an oversight that needed correction. So you Googled me. I did considerably more than Google you, she replied with a hint of her usual precision. I had Howard pull your company's annual reports. I spoke with colleagues who've worked with Meridian. I even called Daniel with some questions, though I didn't tell him why I was asking. I wasn't sure whether to be impressed or unsettled by her thoroughness. Why the sudden interest? Rebecca smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her dress, a gesture I recognized as her way of buying time to compose her thoughts. When you married James, I had certain expectations about the kind of woman he would choose. You didn't fit those expectations. Because I worked. Because you had ambitions that extended beyond this family, she corrected. I saw that as a threat, as something that would eventually pull James away from us, from the life we'd planned for him. I considered this. And now? Now I see that I was operating on outdated assumptions. The world has changed. Families have changed. She met my gaze directly. I'm not saying I fully understand your choices, or that I won't occasionally slip into old habits. But I am saying that I've been unfair to you, and that I'd like to correct that going forward. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But from Rebecca Calloway, this acknowledgement of error was seismic. I sensed it had cost her something to make even this small concession. I appreciate that, I said simply. She nodded once, sharply, as if closing a business negotiation. Good. Now, there's the matter of the annual Calloway Foundation Gala next month. Traditionally, I've chaired the committee, but this year I think it might benefit from fresh perspectives. Would you be interested in co-chairing? The offer took me aback. The Foundation Gala was Rebecca's crown jewel, her most visible contribution to the family legacy. Sharing that spotlight was no small gesture. I'd be honored, I said carefully, though I should warn you my ideas might differ from tradition. A hint of a genuine smile touched her lips. I'm counting on it. The event could use some disruption. Coming from Rebecca, this was practically revolutionary language. I found myself smiling back, not because all was forgiven or forgotten, but because change, real change, was possible. Not through dramatic confrontations or ultimatums, but through small shifts in perspective, through the willingness to see people as they truly are, rather than as projections of our own fears or expectations. James appeared at my side, his expression curious as he observed the unusual sight of his wife and mother in apparently amicable conversation. Everything okay here? More than okay, I assured him. Your mother has just invited me to co-chair the Foundation Gala. His eyebrows shot up. Really? That's unexpected. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, every inch the family matriarch despite this small concession to change. The Calloway name has always been associated with excellence and innovation, James. It seems only fitting that we apply those values to our charitable endeavors as well. She glanced at me. I'll have my assistant send over the previous year's files tomorrow. We can meet next week to discuss direction. With a crisp nod that served as both conclusion and dismissal, she moved away to attend to other guests, leaving James and me watching her retreat. Did my mother just willingly share control of her most prized event? James asked incredulously. I believe she did. And did she imply that your involvement would make it more innovative and excellent? I laughed. Something like that. He shook his head in amazement. Who are you? And what have you done with the woman who's been making my mother's life difficult simply by existing for the past 3 years? I'm exactly who I've always been, I said, looking around at the gathering that had so often made me feel like an intruder. The difference is, now they're finally seeing me. As we mingled with the other guests, I noticed subtle but significant changes in how I was received. Howard engaged me in a detailed conversation about Meridian's growth strategy. Aunt Claire asked about my journey to becoming CEO. Even Eliza made a point of introducing me to her friends with a hint of newfound respect. It wasn't perfect. I caught Rebecca wincing slightly when I mentioned a potential contemporary art installation for the gala. Howard still spoke a bit too loudly when explaining financial concepts to me. Old habits die hard, and 3 years of established dynamics wouldn't dissolve in a single afternoon. But something had shifted, like the first crack in a dam that had held back waters for too long. Not because I had changed who I was or what I valued, but because I had finally stopped, allowing myself to be erased from the narrative. As the afternoon light softened into early evening, James and I found a quiet moment alone on a stone bench overlooking the garden. He took my hand, running his thumb over my wedding ring. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when we got married, my mother warned me that your career would always come first, that eventually I'd have to choose between you and the family." I tensed slightly. "And what did you tell her?" "Nothing at the time. I just let her think whatever she wanted, figured she'd come around eventually." He smiled ruefully. "But today, watching you with everyone, I realized what I should have said, which was that she had it backwards, that your strength isn't a threat to this family. It's exactly what we've been missing. Someone who builds rather than preserves, who creates rather than maintains." He lifted my hand to his lips. "Someone who refuses to be written out of the story." The setting sun bathed the garden in golden light, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and unexplored. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of rightness, not because I had finally been accepted by the Calloway family, but because I had finally accepted my own worth within it. I hadn't come to that birthday dinner seeking validation or recognition. I had come because I refused to be erased, to be treated as inconsequential in my husband's life. What had followed, Daniel's recognition, Howard's interest, Rebecca's reluctant respect, those were just consequences of that single decision to stand in my truth. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing my contemplative expression. I smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I'm thinking that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't confronting others. It's confronting yourself, the part of you that's willing to accept less than you deserve." He nodded slowly. "And the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves." As we sat there, watching the day fade into evening, I thought about all the women who had ever dimmed their light to make others comfortable, who had accepted exclusion rather than risk conflict, who had silenced their own voices to maintain a peace that served everyone but themselves. "No more crossed-out names," I said softly, more to myself than to James. He heard me anyway, tightening his arm around my shoulders. "No more crossed out. Names," he agreed. "Not on guest lists, not in boardrooms, not anywhere." It was a promise, to each other, to ourselves, to the future we would build together. Not as Calloway and outsider, but as equal partners facing the world side by side, names written in permanent ink. Have you ever had to reclaim your place at a table that should have been yours all along? What gave you the courage to finally stand in your truth? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, you deserve to be seen for exactly who you are. No erasures, no compromises, no apologies. The weeks following Howard's retirement party unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. The careful distance I'd maintained between my professional and personal lives collapsed like a house of cards in a gentle breeze. Suddenly, the worlds I had kept separate for 3 years were colliding in unexpected, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately transformative ways. It began with lunch with Howard. Not at the country club where the Calloways typically conducted business, but at a small bistro near Meridian's headquarters. He arrived precisely on time, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, but there was something different in his demeanor, a curiosity perhaps, or a willingness to step outside his usual patterns. "I hope you don't mind the location," I said as we settled at a corner table. "This place is a favorite among our development team. The owner's son is one of our junior engineers." Howard glanced around, taking in the eclectic art on the walls, the mix of professionals and creative types at nearby tables. "It's not what I'm used to," he admitted, "but that's rather the point of this meeting, isn't it? New perspectives." I smiled, surprised by his self-awareness. "Exactly." Over artisanal sandwiches and craft sodas, Howard declining wine with lunch for perhaps the first time in his business career, we discussed potential technology investments. I shared insights on emerging trends, companies with promising innovations, and the challenges of navigating the rapidly evolving tech landscape. What struck me most was how attentively he listened. Howard Calloway had built his reputation on speaking with authority, on being the most knowledgeable person in any room. Yet here he was, asking questions, taking notes, occasionally nodding in thoughtful consideration of perspectives that clearly differed from his own. "You know," he said as our plates were cleared, "I've been in finance for nearly 4 decades. I've weathered recessions, market crashes, technological revolutions. I thought I understood how business evolves. But listening to you talk about your industry, the pace of change, the integration of AI, the security challenges, I realize I've been viewing the future through an outdated lens." He tapped his fingers on the table, a rare gesture of uncertainty, from a man who prided himself on decisiveness. James always tried to tell me this in his way, that the world was changing faster than our traditional models could adapt to. I dismissed it as youthful impatience. I chose my words carefully. Different generations bring different strengths to the table. Your experience and stability are valuable. So is the innovation and adaptability of younger perspectives. The trick is finding the balance. He nodded slowly. "That's precisely what I'm hoping to achieve with this new division. Blending established wisdom with fresh approaches." He met my gaze directly. "Which is why I'd like to formally invite you to join our advisory board." I blinked, genuinely caught off guard. "I'm honored, but I need to be clear about potential conflicts of interest. Meridian works with several financial institutions that might be considered competitors." Howard waved away my concern. "We've already vetted the legal implications. The advisory role would be focused on broader industry trends, not specific investments or proprietary information. Our legal team can draft appropriate boundaries." I studied him, still processing this unexpected offer. "May I ask why? Why now, after 3 years of barely acknowledging my professional expertise?" To his credit, Howard didn't deflect or minimize. He considered the question with the same seriousness he'd give a major investment decision. "Pride," he said finally, "and perhaps a certain ossification of perspective. When you've built something successful, there's a strong tendency to believe your way is the only way, to see different approaches as threats rather than opportunities." "And that's changed?" Let's say I've been forced to reevaluate certain assumptions." A small smile crossed his face. "James has never shown interest in Callaway Investments. For years I interpreted that as a failure. His or mine, I wasn't always sure. It took me too long to recognize that he was building something valuable on his own terms." I nodded, understanding the unspoken parallel. "And you've decided to extend that same recognition to me?" "To be perfectly frank, Olivia, I've ignored a potentially valuable business resource because it didn't fit my preconceived notion of what a Callaway spouse should be. That was short-sighted. I'm attempting to correct that error." It wasn't an apology. Howard Calloway didn't apologize for business decisions, but it was an acknowledgement. a recognition not just of my professional value, but of his own limitations. Coming from a man who had built an empire on the certainty of his judgments, it was significant. "I'll consider the offer seriously," I told him, "and I appreciate the gesture behind it." We parted with a handshake that felt different from our previous interactions, more equal, more genuine. As I watched him walk to his waiting town car, I wondered if this was how reconciliation happened in the Callaway world. Not through emotional conversations or explicit apologies, but through professional respect and pragmatic reassessments. That evening, I shared the encounter with James over dinner. He listened with a mixture of amazement and amusement, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "An advisory board position," he repeated when I'd finished. "Dad doesn't invite outsiders into the business. Ever." "I'm hardly an outsider," I pointed out. "I'm his daughter-in-law." "That's not what I mean." Dad compartmentalizes rigidly. Family is family, business is business. The only family member who's ever had a formal role in the company is me, and that was more theoretical than actual. He twirled pasta around his fork, thoughtful. "This is his way of acknowledging you as a peer. It's unprecedented." I considered this as I sipped my wine. "Do you think I should accept?" James set down his fork, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "Do you want to?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Professionally, it's an interesting opportunity. The advisory board would connect me with influential people across multiple industries. But personally, you're worried about further entangling yourself with a family that hasn't exactly welcomed you with open arms." I nodded. "Exactly. What if this is just another way for your parents to exert control, to bring me into their orbit on their terms?" James reached across the table to take my hand. "What does your instinct tell you?" I thought about Howard's surprising candor, the genuine interest he'd shown in my perspective. That this might be an olive branch, not a perfect one, not offered for entirely selfless reasons, but a beginning. Then maybe the question isn't whether you should accept, but what accepting on your terms would look like. What boundaries would you need to make this work for you? His question shifted something in my thinking. For 3 years, I'd been reacting to the Callaways' terms, their invitations, their exclusions, their expectations. I'd either acquiesced or withdrawn, never truly setting my own parameters for engagement. "You're right," I said slowly. "If I do this, it needs to be with clear boundaries." James smiled. "That's my brilliant wife, always finding the third option when everyone else sees only two." Later that night, as James slept beside me, I drafted an email to Howard. I accepted the advisory position with specific conditions. Quarterly meetings rather than monthly, no expectation of social obligations tied to business functions, and a clear understanding that my primary commitment remained to Meridian. I was offering my expertise, not subsuming my identity into the Callaway empire. Howard's response came the next morning, a simple, "Terms accepted, welcome aboard." No negotiation, no pushback, another small but significant shift in the dynamic. If my relationship with Howard was evolving through professional channels, my interaction with Rebecca was developing in a very different arena. The Foundation Gala co-chairing had begun as I expected, with Rebecca maintaining iron control while creating the illusion of collaboration. Our first planning meeting consisted largely of her presenting decisions she'd already made and waiting for my approval. The theme will be timeless elegance, as it has been for the past 5 years, she informed me, sliding a folder of swatches and sample invitations across her immaculate dining room table. The Westbrook Hotel has already been secured. The Symphony Quartet is confirmed for cocktail hour, and the Parkland Ensemble for dinner and dancing. I flipped through the materials, all beautiful, all impeccable, all utterly predictable. May I ask what the attendance has been like in recent years? Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We consistently sell out. And the demographic? The foundation's most loyal supporters, primarily established families, major corporate donors, a few celebrities for the society pages. I nodded, thinking carefully about my next words. So, primarily people over 50 who attend out of tradition or obligation, with very few new donors or younger supporters. Her posture stiffened slightly. The Callaway Foundation Gala is the most prestigious charitable event of the season. People consider it an honor to be invited. I'm sure they do, I said carefully. But is prestige translating into growing support? Are donation levels increasing year over year? Are we bringing in new generations of philanthropists? Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. What exactly are you suggesting, Olivia? I closed the folder and leaned forward slightly. I'm suggesting that maybe timeless elegance has run its course. That to remain relevant and increase impact, the foundation might benefit from a fresh approach. Such as? The words were clipped, but I noticed she hadn't dismissed the idea outright. A small victory. What if, instead of another formal, ballroom event that blends into every other gala on the social calendar, we created an experience that highlights the actual work of the foundation, something interactive, memorable that connects donors directly to the cause? Rebecca's brow furrowed. The Callaway name has certain expectations attached to it. I understand that, I assured her. I'm not suggesting we abandon elegance or quality, just that we channel it differently, make it meaningful rather than merely traditional. To my surprise, she didn't immediately reject the idea. Instead, she sat back, studying me with new consideration. You're proposing a complete reinvention of an event I've personally overseen for 15 years. I'm proposing evolution, not revolution, I clarified. The heart of the event, supporting the Foundation's mission, remains the same. But the execution could better reflect the forward-thinking work the Foundation actually does. For a long moment, Rebecca was silent, her expression unreadable. Then she reached for her tablet. Show me what you have in mind. That single request opened the door to 3 intense weeks of collaboration that tested both our professional skills and personal patience. Rebecca brought decades of experience in social navigation, donor relationships, and flawless execution. I contributed fresh perspectives on digital engagement, experiential design, and reaching younger philanthropists. We clashed, frequently and sometimes fiercely. Rebecca balked at my suggestion to move the event from the Westbrook to the newly renovated Innovation Center. I pushed back when she insisted on maintaining a rigid seating protocol that separated premier donors from newer supporters. But beneath the friction, something unexpected was happening. We were learning from each other. The trouble with your generation, Rebecca remarked during one particularly heated discussion about the evening's flow, is that you prioritize innovation over tradition without understanding that tradition is what gives events their gravitas. Rather than bristling at the generational divide she kept emphasizing, I considered her point. You're right that tradition creates a sense of continuity and importance. What if we incorporate elements of that tradition into our new approach? Perhaps a ceremonial moment that honors the Foundation's history before launching into its future. She paused, clearly not expecting agreement. That might work. A bridge between established protocols and your more contemporary vision. Slowly, a new concept emerged. Legacy of Innovation, an event that would honor the Foundation's history while showcasing its future impact. We would transform the Innovation Center's main hall into an immersive journey through the Foundation's work, culminating in a formal dinner where traditional elements would blend with interactive experiences. As the plans took shape, I noticed subtle changes in how Rebecca interacted with me. The dismissive edge had faded from her tone. She began asking about my experiences at Meridian, how we handled corporate events, engaged stakeholders, measured impact. She wasn't becoming warm or maternal, But she was, perhaps for the first time, treating me as someone with valid expertise. The real breakthrough came unexpectedly, during a site visit to the Innovation Center 3 weeks before the gala. We were discussing the flow of the evening when Rebecca's assistant called with a crisis. One of the major donors was threatening to pull support over a perceived slight in the foundation's recent newsletter. I watched as Rebecca handled the call with diplomatic precision, smoothing ruffled feathers without making concrete promises. When she hung up, she sighed heavily. Maintaining these relationships is exhausting sometimes. I can imagine, I said. At Meridian, we call it stakeholder emotional management. It's practically a full-time job. She gave a surprised laugh, the first genuine one I'd ever heard from her. That's exactly what it is, though we used to just call it keeping Henry Whitford from throwing a tantrum because someone else's name appeared before his in the donor list. We have a board member like that, I confided. Every press release has to be vetted to ensure he feels sufficiently acknowledged. How do you handle it? I shrugged. Created a special board ambassadors section on our website where his face is prominently featured. He never actually reads it, but knowing it exists keeps him happy. Rebecca smiled, a real smile that transformed her usually severe features. Clever. I've been sending Eleanor Wilkinson personalized thank you notes for 15 years. She has them framed in her powder room. Just like that, we were sharing war stories about difficult personalities and diplomatic solutions, finding unexpected common ground in the challenges of leading organizations dependent on human egos and goodwill. As we finished the site visit and walked to our respective cars, Rebecca hesitated, then said, "You know, when James first brought you home, I was concerned." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I noticed. He'd always dated a certain type of woman. Someone who understood our world, our expectations. She adjusted her designer bag on her shoulder, a gesture I'd come to recognize as her way of buying time to formulate her thoughts. You were different, independent, career-focused. I assumed that meant you wouldn't prioritize family. And now? Now I realize I was operating on an outdated definition of family, one that required women to diminish themselves to fit a predetermined role. She met my gaze directly. I still don't entirely understand your choices, working the hours you do, pursuing the career you have. But I can acknowledge that they don't make you any less committed to James or to building a life together. Coming from Rebecca Calloway, this was tantamount to a full apology and declaration of respect. I recognize the effort it must have taken her to acknowledge even this much shift in her perspective. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot. To me." She nodded once, sharply, as if concluding a business transaction. "The gala planning documents need final approval by Friday. Shall we meet Thursday afternoon?" And just like that, we were back to business. But something had changed. A foundation had been laid for a different kind of relationship, not warm or intimate, perhaps never that, but based on mutual respect rather than judgment and resistance. As the gala approached, the boundaries between my professional and personal lives continued to blur in unexpected ways. Daniel had become a bridge between worlds, stopping by my office occasionally to discuss projects, but also sharing insights about Eliza that helped me understand her better. Howard had introduced me to several key industry contacts who were now exploring partnerships with Meridian. Even Rebecca had begun including me in smaller family gatherings without the tense formality that had previously defined our interactions. The most profound change, however, was with James. As I stepped more fully into both aspects of my life, professional leader and Calloway family member, he seemed to find new confidence in his own path. The constant tension of being caught between family expectations and support for me had eased, allowing him to focus on his own architectural practice with renewed energy. "I'm presenting a major proposal next week," he told me one evening as we prepared dinner together, a domestic ritual we both cherished. The Lakeside Development Committee is looking for innovative approaches to mixed-use spaces. It would be my biggest project yet. I looked up from the vegetables I was chopping. James, that's fantastic. Why didn't you mention this earlier? He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. It's been in the works for a while, but I wanted to wait until it was more concrete. The competition is fierce. Williams and Park are the frontrunners. Williams and Park was one of the city's most established architectural firms, with connections throughout the business community, including Howard's network. In the past, James might have asked his father for introductions or leverage, accepting the strings that would inevitably come attached. The fact that he hadn't even mentioned the opportunity to his family spoke volumes about his changing approach. They may have connections, but they don't have your vision, I said, meaning it. James's designs had always prioritized human experience over flashy aesthetics, creating spaces that felt both beautiful and deeply livable. What's your angle? His eyes lit up as he described his concept, a development that would integrate affordable housing, community spaces, and environmental sustainability without sacrificing aesthetic appeal. As he talked, gesturing with a wooden spoon, tomato, sauce occasionally splattering on the counter, I was struck by his passion and clarity. The presentation is Thursday afternoon, he concluded. If all goes well, this could really put my firm on the map. It's going to go brilliantly, I assured him. Your concept is exactly what that space needs. He smiled, then hesitated. Slightly. There's something else. Dad called yesterday. Apparently he knows someone on the committee. My heart sank a little. Did he offer to put in a word? He did. James turned back to the sauce, adjusting the heat. I told him no. I paused in my chopping. You did? I told him I appreciated the offer, but that I wanted this project on the strength of my design, not his influence. James glanced at me, a mixture of pride and vulnerability in his expression. He was quiet for a moment, then said he respected that. Can you believe it? Howard Calloway, king of leveraging connections, respected my choice to decline his help. I set down my knife and moved to wrap my arms around him from behind. I absolutely believe it, because that choice came from strength, not fear. You're not rejecting his help because you're rebelling or proving a point. You're declining because you believe in your work and want it to stand on its own merit. He leaned back into my embrace. I think watching you these past few weeks, setting boundaries with my parents but still engaging with them on your terms, it showed me another way. Not cutting ties or giving in, but defining the relationship on mutual terms. I rested my cheek against his shoulder, deeply moved by the parallel he'd drawn. I think we're both finding our way to authenticity. It's not about rejecting family or tradition. It's about honoring those connections while remaining true to ourselves. He turned in my arms, sauce-covered spoon carefully held to the side. When did you get so wise? Probably around the time I decided to stop trying to be the daughter-in-law your parents wanted and started being the woman I actually am. I reached up to touch his face, leaving a small smudge of garlic on his cheek. The same time you stopped trying to be the son they expected and embraced being the man you've become. The timer dinged, interrupting our moment. As we returned to dinner preparations, I reflected on how far we'd come in just a few weeks. Not because we'd forced dramatic confrontations or ultimatums, but because we'd finally stood firmly in our truth and let others adjust their expectations accordingly. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for new beginnings. The Innovation Center glowed with strategic lighting, its modern architecture softened by elegant floral installations that bridged traditional and contemporary aesthetics. Inside, the transformation was complete. Interactive displays showcasing the foundation's work stood alongside classical art pieces. Digital elements blended seamlessly with timeless elegance, creating an atmosphere that felt both familiar and fresh. I arrived early, dressed in a midnight blue gown that walked the line between classic and modern. Rebecca was already there, surveying the space with the critical eye of a general before battle. The projection mapping on the north wall is slightly off-center, she noted as I approached. And the champagne station needs to be repositioned for better flow. Already handled, I assured her. The tech team adjusted the mapping 5 minutes ago, and the beverage director is moving the station, as we speak. She nodded approvingly. Efficient. I appreciate that. Coming from Rebecca Calloway, this was high praise indeed. I smiled, recognizing the professional respect that had developed between us over the past weeks. We would never be close in the traditional sense, but we had found a working relationship that honored both her experience and my fresh perspective. The first guests will arrive in 30 minutes, she said, checking her watch. The governor confirmed he'll be here for the opening remarks, and the Whitmores are bringing the CEO of that healthcare technology company you mentioned, Vitality Systems. I raised an eyebrow, surprised that she'd remembered and acted on that connection. That's fantastic. Their work would align perfectly with the pediatric initiative. I know, she said simply. That's why I seated them with the foundation's medical director. I assumed you'd want that conversation to happen. Another small but significant gesture, Rebecca acknowledging my strategic thinking and incorporating it into her meticulous planning. Before I could thank her, Howard and James arrived, both handsome in tuxedos, though James had added a subtly patterned blue tie that matched my dress, while Howard remained classically austere in black and white. The space looks remarkable, Howard commented, surveying the transformation. Unlike any foundation event we've held before, yet still unmistakably Calloway in its execution. The perfect blend of tradition and innovation, James added, giving me a private smile, much like the team that created it. Rebecca's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Yes, well, sometimes fresh perspectives can enhance rather than displace established values. She checked her watch again. I should review the welcome protocol with the staff. Excuse me. As she walked away, Howard nodded toward an elegant older couple just entering. The Harringtons have arrived early. I should greet them. He paused, then added, Olivia, when you have a moment, Harold Harrington has expressed interest in Meridian's work. I mentioned your security innovations and he was quite intrigued. With that, he too moved away, leaving James and me momentarily alone amid the growing bustle of final preparations. Did my father just offer to make a business introduction? For you? James asked, bemused. I believe he did, I confirmed. And your mother just took credit for our collaborative work, while simultaneously acknowledging my contribution. The world has officially tilted on its axis. James laughed, then grew more serious. You know what amazes me most? None of this happened because you tried to become what they wanted. It happened because you finally stopped trying. I considered this, watching the room come to life around us. I think people respond to authenticity, even when they initially resist it. Your parents built their lives on certain expectations and patterns. When I tried to contort myself to fit those patterns, I became a poor imitation of what they already valued, easily dismissed. But when you stood in your own strength, they had to either adapt their perspective or miss out on a genuine connection. I smoothed an invisible wrinkle from his lapel. The same is true for you, you know. The moment you stopped trying to reconcile their expectations with your choices and simply lived authentically, everything shifted. He nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of which, I got a call this afternoon. The Lakeside Committee wants to move forward with my design. James, that's wonderful. I squeezed his hand, mindful of the growing crowd around us. We'll celebrate properly later. Dad called to congratulate me. Said he'd heard through the grapevine that my presentation was innovative and pragmatic. High praise in Howard's speak. The thing is, I know he didn't influence the decision. This was all on the merit of the work. The pride in his voice was unmixed with the underlying tension that had always colored his professional achievements in the past. The question of whether he'd earned success or simply benefited from the Callaway name. This victory was unquestionably his own. The room had filled now, elegant guests mingling amid the displays, exclaiming over the unexpected format of the evening. I spotted Eliza and Daniel near the sustainability exhibit, Daniel explaining something about the technology while Eliza listened with surprising interest. Rebecca moved through the crowd with practiced grace, making introductions and ensuring the evening's flow. Howard engaged with a group of business leaders, occasionally glancing toward the interactive displays with newfound curiosity. "Look at them," James said softly, following my gaze. "They're adapting. Not completely, not perfectly, but genuinely trying to embrace a new chapter." "People can surprise you," I replied, "when you give them the chance to rise to the occasion rather than assuming they'll disappoint you." A soft chime indicated it was time for the welcome remarks. James offered his arm, and as we moved toward the center of the room, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Not to this gala, but to this moment of authentic alignment, with ourselves, with each other, and even, in their own way, with the family that had once seemed determined to erase me. Rebecca stepped onto the small platform, the perfect image of gracious authority in her element. But instead of beginning her usual carefully crafted speech, she surprised everyone by saying, "This evening represents a new chapter for the Callaway Foundation, one that honors our traditions while embracing innovation and inclusion. I'd like to invite my co-chair, Olivia Callaway, to share her vision for tonight's experience." As I joined her on the platform, accepting the microphone with a smile of genuine appreciation for this public acknowledgement, I caught James's eye in the crowd. His expression reflected exactly what I was feeling. Not triumph over adversity or victory in some family power struggle, but the quiet satisfaction of finally being seen and valued for exactly who we were. The path forward wasn't perfect. Rebecca would still occasionally slip into old patterns. Howard would sometimes forget that his way wasn't the only way. Family dynamics built over decades wouldn't transform overnight. But something fundamental had shifted. A door had opened that couldn't be closed again. "Welcome to Legacy of Innovation," I began, addressing the gathered crowd. "Tonight is about connecting our past to our future, about honoring traditions while creating new ones. It's about recognizing that the most powerful legacies aren't built by erasing different perspectives, but by embracing them." As the evening unfolded around us, traditional donors engaging with interactive technology, younger philanthropists connecting with established community leaders, Rebecca and Howard navigating this new terrain with surprising adaptability, I realized that the story of my exclusion from that birthday dinner had transformed into something far more meaningful than simple vindication. It had become a catalyst for authentic connection, for boundaries based on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation. For James and me, it had sparked a recommitment to partnership that extended beyond our marriage into how we engaged with family, work, and community. And for the Callaways, it had initiated a reluctant but genuine evolution, not abandoning their values, but expanding them to include new possibilities. Sometimes, being erased from the guest list is the beginning of writing your own story, one where you don't ask permission to belong, but create belonging through the courage to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. Have you ever found strength in being excluded? Has standing in your truth changed how others see and value you? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, the tables worth sitting at are the ones where you're welcomed as your full, authentic self. No crossed-out names, no diminished voices, no compromised truths. 6 months after the Foundation Gala, I found myself standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office at Meridian, watching the city sparkle in the late afternoon sun. So much had changed since that fateful birthday dinner, subtle shifts that had gradually transformed the landscape of my life, both professional and personal. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Don't forget, dinner at Dad and Rebecca's. At 7. Bringing anything?" I smiled at his casual tone. Monthly family dinners at the Calloway mansion had become a regular part of our calendar. Not an obligation to be dreaded, but simply one aspect of our increasingly balanced life. I texted back, "Just ourselves. The Bordeaux is already in the car." Setting my phone down, I turned back to my desk where quarterly reports awaited my final review. Meridian had exceeded growth projections for the third consecutive quarter, our government security contract expanding into new territories. The tech division Howard had invited me to advise was showing promising early returns, with 2 investments already yielding significant gains. My assistant knocked lightly before entering with a sleek folder. "The final numbers for the Peterson acquisition," she explained. "And Daniel Rowe is here for your mentorship meeting." "Thanks, Emma. Send him in, please." Daniel entered with the confident stride of someone who had found his footing. In the months since that birthday dinner revelation, he had distinguished himself as one of Meridian's rising talents, earning a promotion to project lead on our newest security interface. "Afternoon, Olivia," he greeted me, the formality of our early workplace interactions having evolved into a comfortable professionalism. "I brought the prototype specs you asked for." "Perfect timing. Have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "How are things with the Westlake implementation?" As we discussed project timelines and technical challenges, I reflected on how our relationship had developed, from boss and employee to something more nuanced. He wasn't just Eliza's boyfriend anymore, though that relationship continued, stronger than before. Nor was he merely my employee. He had become a bridge between worlds, helping Eliza understand my professional realm while giving me insights into the younger Calloway's perspective. "Before we wrap up," I said as our meeting concluded, "I wanted to mention that I've recommended you for the Innovation Fellowship. The selection committee meets next week." His eyes widened. Wow, thank you. That's a huge opportunity." "You've earned it," I said simply. "Your work on the adaptive security protocols was exceptional." He nodded, then hesitated. "Can I say something a bit personal?" "Of course." When I first started dating Eliza, she had this perception of you, based entirely on what she'd heard from her mother, I think. She used to say the family dinners were so much more pleasant when you couldn't make it. He looked slightly embarrassed at the admission. I laughed softly. "That doesn't surprise me." "But that night at the restaurant changed everything. Not just because you turned out to be my boss, though that was quite a moment." He smiled at the memory. "But because it forced her to see you differently, to question assumptions she'd never examined." "And how does she see me now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "With respect," he said immediately, "and maybe a little intimidation still. But mostly, I think she's realized that different doesn't mean wrong, that your priorities and choices are valid, even if they're not the ones she would make." Insight touched me more than I expected. "Thank you for telling me that." After Daniel left, I found myself thinking about his words as I finished the day's tasks. Respect didn't require agreement or similarity, just a willingness to see someone clearly, without the distorting lens of expectation or judgment. It had taken a dramatic confrontation to initiate that clarity with the Calloways, but the real transformation had happened in the quieter moments that followed. In consistent authenticity, in boundaries maintained with firmness but not hostility, in gradual mutual adaptation. I arrived home to find James already there, changed from his work clothes into casual attire, a glass of wine in hand as he reviewed blueprints spread across our dining table. "The lakeside expansion's been approved," he announced as I kissed. His cheek. They want to add a cultural center to the original development plan. That's wonderful. They must be thrilled with how the first phase is progressing. The Lakeside Project, his first major independent commission, had been breaking ground when we attended that transformative retirement party. Now, 6 months later, it was garnering attention throughout the architectural community for its innovative integration of community needs and environmental sustainability. They specifically cited the community engagement model as the reason they want to expand the scope, he said, pride evident in his voice. Dad actually called to congratulate me, said he'd been talking about it at the club and everyone was impressed. Howard Calloway, bragging about his son's architectural achievements, I teased, slipping off my heels. The world truly has shifted on its axis. James laughed, but there was a note of genuine pleasure in it. He's trying, in his way. Last week, he sent me an article about sustainable urban planning, not because he was suggesting I consider it, but because he thought I'd find it interesting. It was nice. These small gestures, Howard sending relevant articles, Rebecca occasionally asking my opinion on foundation matters, Eliza including me in group texts about family events, were more meaningful than grand declarations could ever be. They represented a genuine, if sometimes awkward, effort to build a different kind of relationship. Speaking of family, James said, gathering his blueprints, we should probably get ready for dinner. Mom texted that she's trying a new caterer tonight, which means she'll be on edge until everyone compliments the food. I smiled at his casual use of mom rather than the more formal mother he'd always employed before. Another small but telling shift. I'll change quickly. The wines? Already in the car. The drive to the Calloway estate was filled with comfortable conversation about our respective days, plans for the weekend, a documentary we'd been meaning to watch. The ease between us felt like a quiet victory, no tension about the evening. Ahead, no strategies for navigating family dynamics, just the simple pleasure of shared life. As we pulled through the wrought iron gates, I remembered the first time I'd visited this imposing home as James's fiancée. How intimidated I'd felt by its grandeur, how determined to prove I belonged despite Rebecca's obvious reservations. Now, approaching the same circular driveway, I felt none of that earlier anxiety. Not because the house had changed, but because I had, secure in the knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by Calloway approval. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing not the usual housekeeper, but Rebecca herself, elegant as always in tailored slacks and a silk blouse. "You're exactly on time," she said, her traditional greeting now delivered with a hint of warmth rather than implied criticism. "Everyone's in the garden. Howard insisted on cocktails outside while the weather holds." She accepted the wine we'd brought with a genuine, "Thank you, Olivia. Howard will appreciate this vintage." No longer the polite acknowledgement of an obligation fulfilled, but recognition of a thoughtful choice. The garden was ablaze with early autumn colors, strategically placed heaters warding off the evening chill. Rebecca would still occasionally slip into old patterns. Howard would sometimes forget that his way wasn't the only way. Family dynamics built over decades wouldn't transform overnight. But something fundamental had shifted. A door had opened. That couldn't be closed again. "Welcome to Legacy of Innovation," I began, addressing the gathered crowd. "Tonight is about connecting our past to our future, about honoring traditions while creating new ones. It's about recognizing that the most powerful legacies aren't built by erasing different perspectives, but by embracing them." As the evening unfolded around us, traditional donors engaging with interactive technology, younger philanthropists connecting with established community leaders, Rebecca and Howard navigating this new terrain with surprising adaptability, I realized that the story of my exclusion from that birthday dinner had transformed into something far more meaningful than simple vindication. It had become a catalyst for authentic connection, for boundaries based on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation. For James and me, it had sparked a recommitment to partnership that extended beyond our marriage into how we engaged with family, work, and community. And for the Callaways, it had initiated a reluctant but genuine evolution, not abandoning their values, but expanding them to include new possibilities. Sometimes being erased from the guest list is the beginning of writing your own story, one where you don't ask permission to belong, but create belonging through the courage to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. Have you ever found strength in being excluded? Has standing in your truth changed how others see and value you? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, the tables worth sitting at are the ones where you're welcomed as your full, authentic self. No crossed-out names, no diminished voices, no compromised truths. 6 months after the foundation gala, I found myself standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office at Meridian, watching the city sparkle in the late afternoon sun. So much had changed since that fateful birthday dinner, subtle shifts that had gradually transformed the landscape of my life, both professional and personal. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Don't forget, dinner at Dad and Rebecca's. At 7, bringing anything?" I smiled at his casual tone. Monthly family dinners at the Callaway Mansion had become a regular part of our calendar, not an obligation to be dreaded, but simply one aspect of our increasingly balanced life. I texted back, "Just ourselves. The Bordeaux is already in the car." Setting my phone down, I turned back to my desk where quarterly reports awaited my final review. Meridian had exceeded growth projections for the 3rd consecutive quarter. Our government security contract expanding into new territories. The tech division Howard had invited me to advise was showing promising early returns, with 2 investments already yielding significant gains. My assistant knocked lightly before entering with a sleek folder. "The final numbers for the Peterson acquisition," she explained. "And Daniel Rowe is here for your mentorship meeting." "Thanks, Emma. Send him in, please." Daniel entered with the confident stride of someone who had found his footing. In the months since that birthday dinner revelation, he had distinguished himself as one of Meridian's rising talents, earning a promotion to project lead on our newest security interface. "Afternoon, Olivia," he greeted me, the formality of our early workplace interactions having evolved into a comfortable professionalism. "I brought the prototype specs you asked for. Perfect timing. Have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "How are things with the Westlake implementation?" As we discussed project timelines and technical challenges, I reflected on how our relationship had developed, from boss and employee to something more nuanced. He wasn't just Eliza's boyfriend anymore, though that relationship continued stronger than before. Nor was he merely my employee. He had become a bridge between worlds, helping Eliza understand my professional realm while giving me insights into the younger Callaway's perspective. "Before we wrap up," I said as our meeting concluded, "I wanted to mention that I've recommended you for the Innovation Fellowship. The selection committee meets next week." His eyes widened. Wow, thank you. That's a huge opportunity." "You've earned it," I said simply. "Your work on the adaptive security protocols was exceptional." He nodded, then hesitated. "Can I say something a bit personal?" "Of course." "When I first started dating Eliza, she had this perception of you. Based entirely on what she'd heard from her mother, I think. She used to say the family dinners were so much more pleasant when you couldn't make it." He looked slightly embarrassed at the admission. I laughed softly. "That doesn't surprise me. But that night at the restaurant changed everything. Not just because you turned out to be my boss, though that was quite a moment." He smiled at the memory. "But because it forced her to see you differently, to question assumptions she'd never examined." "And how does she see me now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "With respect," he said immediately. And maybe a little intimidation still. But mostly, I think she's realized that different doesn't mean wrong. That your priorities and choices are valid, even if they're not the ones she would make. Their fee. Insight touched me more than I expected. Thank you for telling me that. After Daniel left, I found myself thinking about his words as I finished the day's tasks. Respect didn't require agreement or similarity, just a willingness to see someone clearly without the distorting lens of expectation or judgment. It had taken a dramatic confrontation to initiate that clarity with the Callaways. But the real transformation had happened in the quieter moments that followed. In consistent authenticity, in boundaries maintained with firmness but not hostility, in gradual mutual adaptation. I arrived home to find James already there, changed from his work clothes into casual attire, a glass of wine in hand as he reviewed blueprints spread across our dining table. The lakeside expansion's been approved, he announced as I kissed his cheek. They want to add a cultural center to the original development plan. That's wonderful. They must be thrilled with how the first phase is progressing. The Lakeside project, his first major independent commission, had been breaking ground when we attended that transformative retirement party. Now, 6 months later, it was garnering attention throughout the architectural community for its innovative integration of community needs and environmental sustainability. They specifically cited the community engagement model as the reason they want to expand the scope, he said, pride evident in his voice. Dad actually called to congratulate me, said he'd been talking about it at the club and everyone was impressed. Howard Callaway, bragging about his son's architectural achievements? I teased, slipping off my heels. The world truly has shifted on its axis. James laughed, but there was a note of genuine pleasure in it. He's trying, in his way. Last week, he sent me an article about sustainable urban planning, not because he was suggesting I consider it, but because he thought I'd find it interesting. It was nice. These small gestures, Howard sending relevant articles, Rebecca occasionally asking my opinion on foundation matters, Eliza including me in group texts about family events, were more meaningful than grand declarations could ever be. They represented a genuine, if sometimes awkward, effort to build a different kind of relationship. Speaking of family, James said, gathering his blueprints, we should probably get ready for dinner. Mom texted that she's trying a new caterer tonight, which means she'll be on edge until everyone compliments the food. I smiled at his casual use of mom rather than the more formal mother he'd always employed before. Another small but telling shift. I'll change quickly. The wine's already in the car. The drive to the Callaway estate was filled with comfortable conversation about our respective days, plans for the weekend, a documentary we'd been meaning to watch. The ease between us felt like a quiet victory. No tension about the evening. Ahead, no strategies for navigating family dynamics, just the simple pleasure of shared life. As we pulled through the wrought iron gates, I remembered the first time I'd visited this imposing home as James's fiancé. How intimidated I'd felt by its grandeur, how determined to prove I belonged despite Rebecca's obvious reservations. Now, approaching the same circular driveway, I felt none of that earlier anxiety. Not because the house had changed, but because I had, secure in the knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by Callaway approval. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing not the usual housekeeper, but Rebecca herself, elegant as always in tailored slacks and a silk blouse. "You're exactly on time," she said, her traditional greeting now delivered with a hint of warmth rather than implied criticism. "Everyone's in the garden. Howard insisted on cocktails outside while the weather holds." She accepted the wine we'd brought with a genuine, "Thank you, Olivia. Howard will appreciate this vintage." No longer the polite acknowledgement of an obligation fulfilled, but recognition of a thoughtful choice. The garden was ablaze with early autumn colors, strategically placed heaters warding off the evening chill. Howard stood near a small bar, Set up, deep in conversation with a silver-haired man I recognized as Senator Williams, a longtime family friend. Eliza and Daniel occupied a wrought iron bench near the koi pond, heads bent together over something on Daniel's phone. "James! Olivia!" Howard spotted us first, raising his glass in greeting. "Come meet Tom's daughter. She's just joined the Technology Committee for the Children's Hospital Foundation. Right up your alley, Olivia." There was no hint of the reluctance that had once colored Howard's introductions of me to his social circle. No careful downplaying of my professional role, no subtle steering of conversation toward safer topics. Instead, he seemed almost proud to facilitate connections that acknowledged my expertise. As we joined the small gathering, I was struck by how naturally the evening flowed. Conversation moved easily between business and personal matters, between older and younger generations. I found myself engaged in a fascinating discussion with the senator's daughter about privacy protocols in pediatric healthcare data, a topic that would have been considered too technical for appropriate dinner conversation in the old Callaway social order. "We should connect you with Margaret Whitmore," Rebecca suggested, joining our conversation with a tray of elegant canapes. "She mentioned your input at the Foundation Gala was instrumental in their new remote diagnostics program." I blinked. In surprise, not just at Rebecca facilitating a professional connection, but at her awareness of the impact of that introduction. That would be wonderful. The work they're doing aligns perfectly with some of our new security protocols. "I'll arrange it," she said simply, before moving on to other guests. As dinner was announced, we moved inside to the formal dining room where the massive table gleamed under candlelight. I noted with amusement that Rebecca had maintained her meticulous place settings and floral arrangements. Some traditions remained sacred, but the atmosphere felt noticeably lighter, the conversation less stilted by rigid social expectations. Midway through the main course, Howard cleared his throat, commanding attention with the ease of long practice. "I have an announcement that seems appropriate to share while we're all together." Beside me, James tensed slightly. Old habits die hard, and Howard's announcements had historically been exercises in subtle control or judgment. I placed my hand on his knee under the table, a gentle reassurance. "As you know," Howard continued, "the Callaway Foundation has traditionally focused on education and the arts. Important causes, certainly, but perhaps limited in scope." He glanced at me briefly before continuing. "After considerable reflection and some persuasive arguments from newer family members, the board has approved a significant expansion of our mission." Rebecca's expression revealed nothing, but her posture straightened almost imperceptibly. This was clearly news to her as well. "Beginning next quarter, we'll be launching a technology access initiative aimed at underserved communities. The program will provide not just equipment, but comprehensive training and ongoing support. The goal is to bridge the digital divide that prevents talented young people from accessing opportunities in today's economy." I felt a rush of emotion, recognizing in his description the very initiative I had mentioned to him months ago, a passion project I'd been developing in my limited spare time, one I'd shared during one of our advisory board meetings without any expectation that it would be taken seriously. "Olivia has graciously agreed to chair the committee overseeing this initiative," Howard added, raising his glass in my direction. "Her expertise and vision will be invaluable as we venture into this new territory." The table erupted in congratulatory remarks and questions. James squeezed my hand under the table, his expression a mixture of pride and amazement. I managed to respond appropriately, thanking Howard while fielding inquiries about the program's structure and goals. It wasn't until later, as coffee and dessert were being served, that I found a moment to speak privately with Howard near the sideboard. "I'm honored by your announcement," I told him quietly, but also surprised. "When we discussed this concept, I never expected you to adopt it as a foundation initiative." Howard added a precise measure of cream to his coffee before responding. 3 months ago, I visited the technology lab at City Central High School. Do you know what I found? 20 outdated computers for over 1,000 students. Children waiting in line for 15-minute slots to complete homework assignments that their more privileged peers could finish in the comfort of their homes. I nodded, familiar with the disparity he described. It occurred to me, he continued, that for all the Callaway Foundation's good works over the years, we've been addressing symptoms rather than systems. Funding scholarships for exceptional students who manage to excel despite the odds, rather than changing the odds themselves. He met my gaze directly. Your proposal offered a more fundamental approach. It made sense. Coming from Howard Callaway, this was extraordinary. Not just the adoption of an idea that wasn't his own, but the recognition that his long-held perspective might have been limited. Thank you for trusting me with this, I said simply. He nodded once, sharply. You've earned that trust. After a moment, he added, and I've learned that expanding one's thinking doesn't diminish one's legacy, it enhances it. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself in the front hallway with Rebecca, who was supervising the distribution of coats with her usual efficiency. The technology initiative was a surprise, I commented, keeping my tone neutral. She handed a cashmere wrap to the senator's wife, before turning to me with a small smile that, remarkably, reached her eyes. Howard has always been somewhat resistant to change. It's one of his defining characteristics. Steadfast, some might call it. Stubborn, others might say. And yet, he's embracing this new direction. Yes. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her slacks. I believe you've had a profound effect on him. On all of us, in different ways. How so? She considered her words carefully. The Callaway way has always been clear. Tradition, discretion, careful stewardship of what we've built. We value stability above most things. Her gaze drifted toward the dining room, where James and Howard were engaged in animated conversation over a rare whiskey. But stability can calcify into rigidity if not occasionally challenged. I nodded, understanding what this admission cost her. And I've been that challenge. Indeed. A hint of her old crispness returned. Not always comfortably, but necessary perhaps, like pruning a well-established garden to allow for new growth. It was as close to an acknowledgement of my positive influence as Rebecca Callaway was likely to give, and I received it as the significant gesture it was. As James and I drove home later that night, the lights of the city creating patterns across the windshield, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From that painful exclusion at his birthday dinner to this evening of genuine, if still evolving, family connection. You're quiet, James observed, reaching over to take my hand. Everything okay? More than okay, I assured him. I'm just thinking about how far we've come. Not just with your family, but with ourselves. He nodded, understanding. It's not perfect. Mom still occasionally makes those little comments about when we might start a proper family. Dad sometimes forgets and talks over you in business conversations. But they're trying. We're all trying. That's exactly it, I said softly. 6 months ago, I would have measured success by whether they fully accepted me on my terms. Now I realize it's not about reaching some perfect endpoint. It's about the willingness to keep growing, to keep seeing each other more clearly, even when it's uncomfortable. We pulled into our driveway, the modest home we'd chosen together glowing warmly in the darkness. As we walked toward the front door, hand in hand, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the improved family dynamics, but for the deeper partnership James and I had forged through the challenges we'd faced. Inside, I kicked off my heels with a contented sigh while James loosened his tie. The familiar comfort of our own space, created according to our own values and preferences, felt like a physical manifestation of the life we'd built, independent of Callaway expectations, yet enriched by those connections rather than diminished by them. "I got another call today," James said casually as he hung up his jacket. "From Regional Arts Center. They want to discuss a possible expansion. Apparently, someone recommended my work rather enthusiastically." "That's wonderful! Who was the recommendation from?" He smiled, a mixture of disbelief and pleasure. "Mom, apparently. She's on their board of trustees, has been for years." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Rebecca Callaway, who had once dismissed James's architectural career as a regrettable detour from the family business, was now actively promoting his work to her social connections? She told them my community-centered approach was refreshingly practical while maintaining aesthetic integrity, he continued, clearly still processing this development himself. Direct quote, according to the director. I moved to embrace him, resting my head against his chest where I could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Your work deserves that recognition. It always has." "I know," he said softly. But hearing it from her, it matters in a way I didn't expect it to. Not because I need her approval anymore, but because it means she's finally seeing me, the real me, not the son she thought I should be. His words echoed my own journey with the Callaways. The greatest gift hadn't been their acceptance, but their willingness to see us clearly, without the distorting lens of expectation or tradition. To recognize our choices and paths as valid, even when different from their own. We moved to the kitchen, falling into our comfortable evening routine, James pouring us each a nightcap while I gathered the mail from the entry table. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a thick cream envelope bearing the Callaway Foundation's embossed logo. "What's this?" I murmured, slitting it open. Inside was a formal invitation to the Foundation's annual board retreat, traditionally reserved for trustees and major donors. Clipped to it was a handwritten note from Rebecca. "Olivia, your presence would be valuable as we discuss the technology initiative and other new directions. Howard suggested your inclusion, and I concur. Your perspective has proven insightful. Rebecca." I handed it to James, who read it with raised eyebrows. "The board retreat? That's practically sacred ground. Mom doesn't even invite distant family members to that." "Apparently I've been upgraded from unwanted outsider to valuable perspective," I said with a small laugh. He set the invitation on the counter, taking my hands in his. "You know you don't have to go, right? This isn't about proving anything to them anymore." I nodded, appreciating his protection of my boundaries. "I know, but I think I want to. Not to gain their approval, but because I genuinely believe in the work. Because I have something meaningful to contribute." And that perhaps was the most profound shift of all. 6 months ago, I might have accepted such an invitation as validation, proof that I'd finally earned my place at the Callaway table. Now, I saw it simply as an opportunity to create impact in an area I cared about, with people who were gradually becoming family in a real sense, rather than merely by legal definition. The next morning, I called Rebecca to accept the invitation. The conversation was brief but cordial, focused on logistics and expectations. As we concluded, she surprised me with an unexpected question. "Olivia, I've been considering updating the East Wing guest rooms. They're rather dated, and your home has such a cohesive aesthetic. Would you be willing to recommend your interior designer?" I smiled at the small olive branch, Rebecca Callaway asking for my input on her carefully guarded domain. "I'd be happy to, but there's no designer to recommend. James and I did it ourselves." A pause. "You designed your home yourselves?" James handled the structural elements, of course. I focused on the furnishings and color palette. We wanted it to reflect both of us. Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps you might share some thoughts on direction when you're here for the retreat. If you have time, of course. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Not because I particularly cared about the East Wing guest rooms, but because the request represented something significant, Rebecca acknowledging that my different approach might have value, might even enhance her carefully maintained world, rather than threaten it. That evening, as James and I shared a quiet dinner on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I thought about all the ways exclusion can shape us. How being crossed off a guest list can either break us or forge us into something stronger. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing my contemplative expression. I was remembering how it felt that night at Bellissimo, seeing my name crossed out on the reservation list, your mother asking if I honestly thought I was welcome. He winced slightly. Not our finest family moment. No, I agreed, but necessary in its way. It forced everything into the open. All the unspoken tensions, the accommodations we'd been making, the parts of ourselves we'd been hiding or diminishing to keep the peace. And now? I reached for his hand across the table. Now I realize that sometimes the tables we fight, hardest to join, aren't the ones that truly matter. What matters is building our own tables, creating spaces where we can be fully ourselves and invite others to do the same. He nodded slowly. I used to think family was about conforming, fitting yourself into predetermined roles and expectations. Now I see it's about expanding, making room for new perspectives, new traditions, new ways of connecting. Exactly. Your parents are learning that. So are we. I smiled at him, feeling a deep contentment that had nothing to do with Calloway, approval and everything to do with the authentic life we were creating together. The greatest gift we can give each other is the space to be fully seen and valued, not despite our differences, but because of the unique perspective those differences bring. As night fell around us, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, I reflected on how far we'd come from that painful exclusion. Not because the Calloways had magically transformed into a different family, but because James and I had stopped contorting ourselves to fit their mold. We had stood firmly in our truth, maintained clear boundaries, and allowed them the opportunity to adapt, or not, to this reality. They had chosen, in their imperfect, sometimes awkward way, to adapt, to expand their definition of family, of success, of worthwhile contribution, not completely, not without occasional relapses into old patterns, but genuinely and with increasing openness. And we had chosen to receive these efforts with grace, to acknowledge progress without demanding perfection, to build bridges where possible while maintaining the integrity of our own path. That night, as we prepared for bed, I noticed James looking at an old photo on our dresser, the two of us on our wedding day, young and hopeful, unaware of the challenges ahead. "If you could go back and tell yourself one thing," he asked, "what would it be?" I considered the question carefully. I'd tell myself that belonging isn't about being accepted exactly as they want you to be. It's about having the courage to show them exactly who you are, and giving them the chance to rise to that reality. He smiled, setting the photo back, in its place. And what if they don't rise to it? Then you know where you stand, and you can build your life accordingly, not in anger or resentment, but in clarity and purpose. I moved to embrace him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. But I'd also tell myself that people can surprise you if you give them the chance. That change is possible, even in the most tradition-bound families, not because you demand it, but because you demonstrate a different way of being. As we settled into bed, the quiet darkness wrapping around us like a blanket, I thought about all the women who have felt excluded, diminished, or erased by families that couldn't see their full value, who have sat at tables where their names were crossed out, literally or figuratively, their voices silenced, their contributions minimized. My message to them, to you if you're watching this, is simple. Stand in your truth. Not with rage or defiance, but with quiet certainty. Create boundaries that protect your authentic self while remaining open to genuine connection. Recognize that sometimes the greatest gift you can give others is the opportunity to grow beyond their limitations by encountering your wholeness. And remember that the tables worth sitting at are the ones where you're welcomed as your complete self. Your achievements, your ambitions, your unique perspective, all recognized as valuable contributions rather than inconvenient deviations from expectation. Sometimes, being excluded from one table is the universe's way of guiding you toward building your own. One where everyone's name is written in permanent ink, where no voice is silenced, where differences are celebrated rather than merely tolerated. That's the table I've built with James. It's the table I now occasionally share with the Callaways, on new and clearer terms. And it's the table I invite you to create in your own life, one relationship, one boundary, one authentic choice at a time. Have you ever been excluded only to find it led to something better? How did you handle relationships where you weren't fully valued? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm here to remind you that sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most powerful reclamations of self. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.